Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to come talk in this forum, and I'm excited to be a part of this initiative in general. My name is Brad Wilkins. I'm the director of the Organ Performance Research Laboratory, and also an assistant professor in the Department of Human Physiology at the University of Oregon. So our lab mission is to discern the physiological limitations of performance to measurably elevate human potential. So not only do we do basic studies, basic physiology studies in humans to understand what are these physiological limits, but we translate that knowledge and translate that information to measurably impact athlete performance and human potential. We do that in three main ways. Through the novel scientific exploration, we ask novel, innovative questions around these limits of human performance and human potential. What is it that doesn't allow an athlete to go one step further? What is it that causes exhaustion when they cross the finish line? What are those physiological underpinnings that describe that response? We ask fundamental questions around physiology to really get at those questions. In addition, we communicate that knowledge and have a lot of programs to try to communicate and apply that information to the masses. So not only do we publish scientific papers in top journals, but we also have a social media communication program, as well as we give presentations at conferences and elsewhere to try to communicate that knowledge that we're learning in the lab every day. Thirdly, in our lab, we try, as well as other labs within human physiology and across campus, we cultivate a culture of curiosity. We inspire, hopefully, our students, both graduate students, undergraduate students, as well as trainee postdocs, to ask curious questions, to ask innovative and creative questions, and to set up experiments in creative ways to go after some of these problems that we're trying to solve. Come up with creative solutions to problems around human performance. This is the type of culture that we're trying to cultivate in our laboratory. Some of the research activities, we have a lot of different research activities going on in our laboratory. This is just a handful of those that are currently happening. One of the big programs that we have is to try to understand sex hormones, and in particular, fluctuation of female sex hormones on endurance performance. We have several studies going on right now to try to understand what is it that might impact human performance across the menstrual cycle, across age, so perimenopause, postmenopausal women, and the fluctuations long-term, as well as fluctuations month-to-month in female sex hormones and how that might impact performance. We also have a large program looking at the potential role for gut microbes in exercise training adaptations and how that might eventually impact performance. So the gut microbiome gets a lot of press these days, and we're trying to understand what is it about the gut microbiome that interacts with the host, in this case a human, that might impact their performance, both immediately as well as long-term through adaptations with training. We work with a lot of Olympians that train here in town and track their training responses, especially their training responses when they go to altitude camps, where we try to understand what is it that might be stimulated by those altitude camps, like hemoglobin mass. Is that changing? Is blood volume changing? Are other blood markers changing? So we work with some of the Olympians in town that are training, especially the endurance runners, who are attending these altitude camps, trying to understand what their specific individual responses are. We also have a collaboration with our colleagues at the Bowerman Sports Science Center, who you're going to hear from next, looking at injury risk and fatigue in female soccer players. So as fatigue progresses throughout a match or throughout training, does that impact the risk for injury in these female soccer players? So we have some studies going on in that area as well. Finally, we do a lot of community outreach, and we have some athlete testing services that community members can come in, especially community members who are specifically training to go and perform at their best. We can have some of those folks come into the lab and be tested and understand their unique physiology and how their training might be impacting that unique physiology. Give a little bit of an example of something that we do. This runner on the treadmill here is an elite runner, a multiple former All-American runner in college. He's doing a test where he's running to fatigue. This is looped, so you're not going to see him actually fall off the back of the treadmill. In fact, he's strapped in there. As you can see, he has a harness. So we asked him to run for as long as he could until exhaustion, until he couldn't run anymore and had to fall on that harness. And you can see a couple of the markers that we look at are oxygen consumption in the blue line, or VO2 max. You can see that rise until he fatigues at about a little after 3 minutes. By the way, that's 70 plus milliliters per kilogram per minute VO2 max, which is quite high. Another marker that we look at is muscle oxygenation. That's in the gray line. And you can see that as he starts to run, that plummets and almost goes to zero. So that's looking at within his muscles, what's his body's ability to oxygenate that area. And at fatigue, it was quite low. So this is just an example of some of the studies that we have and some of the markers or measurements that we do. As I mentioned, we have a large social media presence. This is just some examples of some of the posts that we put out there. Not only do we, I guess, marketing is probably not the right term, but yes, not only do we market our own lab in the publications that we put out there into the world, but we also have monthly journal clubs that will put out interesting papers that our lab is reading as a journal club, and we'll put that out. Other interesting papers that might be just published that we want the world to know about, we will put those out as well. So, and anything that we really want to communicate about as a lab, we will put that out in social media. So that's one of the ways that we communicate. So thank you for listening, and follow us on our social media.